Community finding is the process of identifying communities in a social network such as Facebook by studying a graph of the relationships between its members. In this video, I'll give a brief introduction to the study of community finding. In future videos, I'll give some details of the particular aspects of community finding research we do here at Grand Valley. Facebook and other social networks can be described by a graph where the vertices are people and the edges represent some relationship between them. For example, with Facebook, links could represent friendship. In a graph representing a chess club, the nodes could be the players and the links could show which players have played each other. Community finding is the process of determining what the communities are by examining the graph. For example, in this graph, there appears to be 3 communities. The graph tells us which players tend to play each other often, but it doesn't tell us why. It doesn't tell us why these communities exist. We don't know, for example, if the communities represent players of similar ability, or maybe they're players who live near each other so they get together more often. Regardless of the reason, the graph provides insight into the social structure of the group. Notice that individuals can belong to more than one community. Consider this graph. The red node could reasonably be assigned to the community with some nodes on the left, a community with nodes on the right, or both. Whether it's reasonable for a node to belong to multiple communities at one time depends on the context of the interaction. It makes perfect sense in the context that we've talked about, Facebook and a chess club, but there may be others where membership should be exclusive. A community finding algorithm assigns each member of a social network to one or more communities. For any given graph, there are many possible assignments, some of which are obviously reasonable, and some that don't seem to describe the real-world behavior at all. Notice that it's not clear at a glance which of these top 3 community assignments best represents the network's group structure. In order to develop an algorithm to choose the best community assignment, we also need a set of rules called an objective function that quantifies the quality of a given community assignment. The design and choice of objective functions is a talk unto itself, but at a high level, an assignment is good if there are few missing links within each community, few links between communities, and little overlap. We want to minimize the number of missing edges within a community because a large number of missing edges indicates that the community isn't very cohesive, that the members of the community may not have a lot in common. A large number of edges between communities may suggest that the communities as defined aren't sufficiently distinct, that they may really be better described as a single community. Likewise, a large overlap also suggests a lack of distinction between the communities. Professor Scripps here at Grand Valley has developed an objective function that, for the most part, is simply the sum of these 3 penalties, if you will. There's a little more to his objective function than just adding these penalties, but that's the important idea. Community finding is just a search for the community assignment with the lowest value for the objective function. This means that there's a very simple, trivial community finding algorithm. Simply generate all the possible community assignments, apply the objective function to each one, and pick the one with the lowest value. The problem is that this simple approach is way too slow because the number of community assignments is just absurdly large. For example, to generate all 400 trillion ways to place 8 people into 8 groups would take 70 days on the i7s we have here at Grand Valley. Increasing the number of people from 8 to 10 would increase the time to 14,000 years. And analyzing a real-world data set, for example, the 34-person karate data set that's referenced frequently in the literature, would require 4.4 trillion years. So a simple brute force attack like this isn't going to do us much good in general. So what do? Well, we use heuristics. We use algorithms that don't necessarily look at every possible assignment, but make some good guesses as to where the good community assignments are. These algorithms are not guaranteed to find the optimal solution, but they usually find a decent solution in a reasonable amount of time. There are several different types of community finding heuristics. Perhaps the most popular right now are based on agglomerative or clustering techniques. These techniques can be applied either top-down or bottom-up. When using the top-down approach, we begin by placing all of the nodes into a single community. We then split one or more communities to maximize some objective function, and continue splitting communities until we've met some terminating condition, perhaps a target number of communities or a target objective function value. With bottom-up clustering, we begin by placing each node in its own community and then repeatedly combine communities so as to maximize the objective function. There are also heuristics based on graph theory. For example, we can identify all of the large cliques in a graph and then combine those cliques with a large amount of overlap. We may also have to include some nodes that aren't part of larger cliques. Finally, I'll mention the Chi heuristic developed here at Grand Valley by Professor Scripps. The next question is, why bother? What's the benefit of identifying communities based on some graph? One potential benefit is better influence maximization. Suppose you're a soft drink company and are introducing a new product into the market. You want to maximize the number of people who try the new product while limiting the number of free samples. Suppose this is your target market and your budget allows for only 6 free samples. To whom will you give them? A naive approach would be to give your samples to the 6 best connected people. But in this case, that would put all 6 samples in the same community, thereby reducing the probability that people outside that one community will hear about the new product. Instead, you could use a community finding algorithm to make sure that at least one sample goes to each community. This process is also somewhat related to epidemiology. The techniques we used here to maximize the spread of information about the new product are related to the techniques that one might use to contain the spread of a disease. Community finding can also help us predict the behavior of groups. For example, it may show us how a group might split should a conflict arise. This graph depicts the social interactions of a 34-member college karate club studied in the early 1970s. A graph theory-based algorithm identified these 2 communities. It so happened that during the course of the original study, a dispute arose within the club over the cost of karate lessons. This disagreement grew to the point that the club split into 2 separate organizations. One might initially expect that the members divide themselves according to their opinions on the original source of the disagreement, the cost of the karate lessons. However, in general, the desire to maintain social relationships, to remain with your friends, overrode the preference for a particular cost structure. Thus, the community finding algorithm was a better predictor of how the club would split than the members' individual opinions on the original dispute. Several of us here at Grand Valley do some work in community finding. One major line of research from Professor Scripps is his heuristic called Chi. We also study the benefits of different objective functions. Different objective functions will lead our community finding algorithms to generate different community assignments. And so we're curious which objective functions lead to those community assignments that are most useful in the real world, will allow us to make the best predictions or best decisions. We also like to study the complete search space for small graphs. Community finding heuristics make some educated guesses as to where to look for the best community assignments, but they don't look at every one. There's not enough time. But for small graphs, we can look at every one, so if we have a feel for what this space looks like, we can make better guesses as to where to look for the best ones in larger graphs. We also plan to spend some time studying the computational complexity of our different objective functions. There is a set of problems, including the traveling salesman problem, that are widely known for being very difficult. Difficult to the point that, as of today, nobody knows how to solve these problems in a reasonable amount of time. All the algorithms for the traveling salesman problem that are used in practice are heuristics. Now, we expect that most of our objective functions fit in the same category, that as a practical matter, we have to use heuristics. But we don't know that for sure, and we do plan to spend some time trying to prove that mathematically. We also plan to spend some time comparing different community finding algorithms developed by others. Because these different algorithms tend to use different objective functions, they haven't always been carefully compared to each other. So we're considering using Chi's objective function as a standard to measure some of these different heuristics. So hopefully this talk has given you an idea of what community finding is all about, why it's a useful thing to pursue, and how we are attempting to contribute to that here at Grand Valley. If anything you've seen here is interesting and you want to know more about it, or you have ideas that you'd like to try out, Stop by any of our offices and we'd love to chat with you. Thanks for watching.